Imagine a continent rich in gold, cobalt, oil, and rare earth minerals, resources that power everything from smartphones to electric cars. Now imagine that continent sitting at the crossroads of global trade routes, with a young, fast-growing population and a future worth trillions. That's Africa. And right now, the world's major powers, China, the United States, and Russia, are all racing to secure their influence here. Welcome to the new geopolitical battleground. Africa has always been strategically important, but the 21st century has reignited interest for entirely new reasons. The global shift toward renewable energy, electric vehicles, and digital infrastructure has made Africa's untapped natural resources more valuable than ever. China, the United States, and Russia are not just competing for resources. They're competing for influence, access, and allegiance. China wants raw materials and trade dominance. The United States wants to maintain global hegemony and contain Chinese influence. Russia wants political alliances, military footholds, and ways around Western sanctions. It's a high-stakes game, and Africa is right in the middle of it. Let's start with China, the most visible player on the continent. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China has poured over $150 billion into African infrastructure projects, from railways in Kenya and Nigeria to deep-sea ports in Djibouti and Tanzania, and even massive hydropower dams across the Congo River. China's blueprint is clear: build, lend, and influence. But there's a catch: debt diplomacy. Many African nations owe billions to Chinese banks. Critics call it debt trap diplomacy, where loans are offered for grand infrastructure projects but come with hidden political strings. When countries can't repay, Beijing gains leverage, sometimes in the form of land, ports, or political loyalty. Still, many African leaders see China as a partner who delivers results without lectures on democracy or human rights. Chinese-built highways and power grids are visible proof of progress in places where Western aid often came with endless conditions. Next, we have the United States, which is trying to play catch-up. For decades, Washington's involvement in Africa was limited to aid, health programs, and counterterrorism. But as China's cranes and engineers spread across the continent, the U.S. realized it was losing the influence game. Now America is responding with strategic investments and military partnerships. Programs like Prosper Africa and the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment aim to counter China's Belt and Road by offering transparent alternatives: cleaner financing, renewable energy projects, and digital investments. Militarily, the U.S. has over 30 bases and outposts across Africa, particularly in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa. These are officially for counterterrorism, but they also serve as geopolitical anchors. Djibouti, for instance, hosts both U.S. and Chinese military bases, sometimes within just a few miles of each other. But the U.S. faces an image problem. Many Africans still associate American involvement with drone strikes, regime changes, or exploitative trade deals. Washington talks about democracy, but Beijing builds roads. And for everyday Africans, roads and jobs often matter more than lectures about governance. So why is everyone suddenly obsessed with Africa? Because the numbers are impossible to ignore. Africa holds 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including 70% of global cobalt, essential for electric vehicle batteries. It's home to more than 1.4 billion people, half of whom are under 25, a massive future workforce and consumer base. By 2050, Africa's GDP could triple, making it one of the largest economic regions in the world. Control over Africa's resources and trade routes means control over the future of global energy, manufacturing, and logistics. Whoever wins Africa doesn't just gain wealth, they gain geopolitical leverage. But infrastructure and loans are only one part of the story. The next chapter is about military alliances, political manipulation, and information warfare, turning Africa into a modern-day chessboard, where every move counts. If infrastructure and loans are China's weapons, and diplomacy and soft power are America's tools, then Russia's strategy in Africa is built on something much older: guns, gold, and power.
When the Soviet Union collapsed, Moscow's influence in Africa nearly vanished. But under Vladimir Putin, Russia has been rebuilding its presence, one military contract at a time. Since the early 2010s, Moscow has signed security and defense agreements with more than 20 African nations, from Algeria and Egypt to Mali, Sudan, and the Central African Republic. In these deals, Russia offers weapons, training, and sometimes direct military support, often in exchange for mining rights or political backing at the UN. One of the key players here is the Wagner Group, a private military company with deep ties to the Kremlin. Wagner forces have been spotted in Libya, Mali, Sudan, and the Central African Republic, guarding mines, fighting rebels, and protecting pro-Russian regimes. They aren't just soldiers, they're power brokers. Even after the death of Wagner's founder, Russia rebranded the network and kept its footprint alive under the Africa Corps, ensuring that Moscow's influence continues, less as an empire, more as a shadow presence. Russia's military presence is deeply connected to resource extraction. In countries like Sudan and the Central African Republic, Russian companies have gained access to gold and diamond mines, sometimes using local militias to secure them. This not only fuels Russia's economy under Western sanctions, but also funds its operations abroad. By offering no-strings-attached deals, Russia appeals to governments that resent Western pressure about human rights or democracy. Moscow's message is simple: we'll help you stay in power, you help us gain resources and votes at the UN.
It's not just Russia building bases and influence. The entire continent is becoming a military chessboard. China has its first overseas military base in Djibouti, near the U.S. base Camp Lemonnier. The United States maintains drone bases in Niger, Kenya, and Somalia. France, once dominant in West Africa, has been losing ground fast. After a wave of coups in the Sahel region, French troops were expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Many of those new military regimes are now turning to Russia for support instead. This military reshuffling is creating a power vacuum, and everyone's rushing to fill it. But for African nations, it's not just about choosing sides. It's about leveraging this competition to gain more independence and better deals. Here's the twist: Africa isn't just the victim in this story. It's becoming a strategic player. Countries like Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria are balancing relations between East and West. South Africa is part of BRICS, alongside China and Russia, but also trades heavily with the US and Europe. Kenya hosts Western troops for counterterrorism while negotiating Chinese-built railways and ports. Even small nations like Djibouti have learned to rent out land for foreign bases from multiple countries, turning geopolitics into a business model. This emerging non-aligned strategy lets African governments benefit from all sides without fully committing to one camp. It's a delicate dance, but it reflects growing confidence and a refusal to be treated as pawns. The next decade will decide whether Africa becomes a zone of cooperation or confrontation. If global powers choose rivalry over partnership, the continent could face new forms of economic dependency and political instability. But if African leaders continue asserting sovereignty, negotiating deals on their own terms, Africa could transform from the world's battleground into its power broker. Africa is no longer the world's sleeping giant. It's awake, and the world's superpowers are racing to win its favor. The question isn't whether Africa will rise, it's who will rise with it. This is the new scramble for Africa, a story of power, promise, and possibility.